This time on Poll Hub, we're looking at our Marist Poll America Now index for February. How are Americans feeling about health, the economy, and a bunch of other things? We'll dig in and look at the numbers. And then with so much emphasis on the pandemic and the economy, it's easy to forget that the president has, other responsibilities, like, foreign policy. What are Americans thinking about Joe Biden's handling of foreign policy? It's a critical part of the presidency, and we're going to take a look at that. Lots to do, so let's get to it. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm Jay DeDapper, Director of Innovation here at the Marist Poll.
And I'm Barbara Carvalho, Director of the Marist Poll.
And I'm Lee Miringoff, Director of the Marist College Institute for Public Opinion.
We've been doing the America Now Index since last spring. And as we've mentioned the last time I think we did this, I said, indexes only get interesting once we've done it for a little while and there's a bit of a trend. We have interns that are doing media work for us, the big program called C2C, College to Career, and they work on with us to develop a lot of our social media content and do a bunch of other things. The index came out at the end of the week last week, and a couple of the students said, well, but the numbers didn't change very much. So what's the story? And I thought that was kind of interesting because things don't have to change for there to be a story. In fact, the lack of change can be a story in and of itself. And indeed, the index has been in the aggregate pretty flat over the last month or two, but not flat at like a super high level. And I think that's part of the story is if there's a recovery going on, we're not seeing Americans thinking that recovery is really in full progress yet, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a important observation. What we found this time in this month's National Outlook, as we've talked about before, the National Outlook Index ranges from a low of 0 as a score to 10, and it's an average of a number of different issues that we look at across several very large areas of American life: the economy, health, community, and society. And right now it's at 6.2, which is kind of in the blechy middle. I don't know, is blech, a technical,
Scientific term.
survey technical term?
Sure.
But I think it is really interesting that we have not seen much of a change in the index. Um, you know, post post election, we saw a little bit of an increase during the fall of last year in September, and then in October. Actually, it reached our high of 6.5, which isn't huge, but in index terms, each tenth of a point makes a bigger difference than one would be in just survey results. But it's really seemed to kind of bottom out at this kind of very cautiously optimistic level. And one of the things that is really pulling the index down is the economy. So, to your point, Jay, the focus on the fact that many states are looking to open up, that there is a sense that perhaps the economy is, I wouldn't say getting back to normal, but is making steps to return to something that is a little bit more normal. It certainly hasn't registered here. What about your thoughts?
I was just going to jump in and just say the step down from blech, Barb, is yuck. I don't think we've hit yuck yet. So, but I look at these.
Should we recalibrate this and take the numbers out and just use words like we could use Batman words like pow, zam, stuff like
and
that.
then we go down. Anyway, so the when I look at these numbers and I wanted you also to speak for a second also because you referred to a difference between what a standard poll might be in an index, which I think is a good learning lesson for everyone, but teachable moment. But when I look at these numbers, I'm seeing the two that really jump out is that jobs right now are easy to find, which continues to kind of be a drag.
That's the question we ask. We ask people if they think that jobs are easy to find.
And then I think the other that also scores below 5, there's two others that scored below 5.0, which is sort of the middle of all this. Good time to make purchases and investments. And then also you live under the society questions, you live in a society that is just and fair. And those things seem to be a real drain on the overall numbers and continue to be. Not much movement on that, but there was in each of the four indicators on the economy, each one went up by a click or two. So there was a little sense of recovery, but nothing yet to write home about.
So what does this really say then about the mood of the country?
I mean, it strikes me that we are in a bit of a holding pattern. I think there was some expectation, I think, especially among some Democrats, that there would be this wave of relief or excitement or whatever it would be once Joe Biden was elected, that there would then be this kind of change in attitude. And I think among Democrats there was, but among Republicans, it has maybe gone the other way. And we see a little bit of that in a lot of the different polling, not just here in the partisan divide between Democrats and Republicans. But I also think that the facts on the ground have only really appreciably changed in the last few weeks. And I'm kind of curious to see where we go this spring with the index for that reason. If you think about it, the pandemic has been the 800-pound gorilla this entire time, and the economy is associated with this for a year now. A lot of people attribute Joe Biden's win to the fact that the pandemic was not handled by, a lot of people judge Donald Trump to be not very good at handling that. There's a third vaccine coming out right now as we speak. There are additional vaccine slots opening. There's up to 1.5 million people are being vaccinated each week? It's not each day, right? It's each week, right?
No,
yeah.
No, I think it's.
Is it each day?
No, I think it's actually
each day. So it's 1 million. Right.
That's a daily. Yeah, that's a
so
daily.
So it's 1.5 million people being vaccinated each day. And Joe Biden saying this week, if you want to get a vaccine, every American will be able to get a vaccine by the end of May. And then states opening. Now, there's a lot of concern about states like Texas opening because infections are increasing again there, and they're opening. But I think that, coupled with spring, getting out of the winter and all that stuff, it just strikes me that we kind of we may have gotten the last point before there really is a turn here, both in the actual economy and in what people's opinions are about a variety of things. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we'll be talking about this a month from now and it'll be all the same numbers. But I kind of sense that we're ready to see these numbers go from black to
Well, and I think some of the other polling does suggest that as well. There was a Gallup poll at the end of February, about the time when we were also in the field with our index poll, and that showed that 27% of Americans were satisfied with the way that things are going in the U.S. Now, that doesn't sound like a huge number, but that's actually up from 11% in January. So it was a significant jump, and actually back to the pre-winter numbers, which they clocked in November 2020 at 28%. So maybe this this Northeast, Midwest, getting out of winter thing, has an impact on this as well. But certainly, Jay, when you reference the partisan divide, and I know we say this every time, but it is so stark. Even when we look at these Gallup numbers, 45% of Democrats say they're satisfied with the way things are going, and 6% of Republicans say the same. So it's just it's night and day, and really a lot of it is focused on who's in charge in Washington.
Yeah, and I would just point out, as we look prospectively, looking down the road, I mean, I think there's two ways of thinking about how this might move. One way is sort of short-term things, which you alluded to, Jay. The handling of the coronavirus and things improving on that front, then improvement on the economy and those short-term things. But to move this index into really good numbers, we're going to have to also have some long-term improvement in sort of the faith of in our institutions, our trust in our leaders. There's questions that deal with that, which leads me back to what I talked about, Barb, earlier. The notion of, for our audience, this is an index. We hear a lot about polls. We just referenced the Gallup poll. Um, what what do you kind of like use as a criteria for what makes an index and a poll a poll?
Well, an index takes a group of questions, and in our case, what we've done is we have four measures for the economy, four measures for health, four measures for what we call community, which is about how satisfied people feel with the place where they live, safety, crime, and then also society, which gets at this issue, Lee, of trust in institutions and how fair people think things are, and also points to this concept of the American dream and what's ahead for future generations. So we have these four areas which then have four questions under each, and they're an average. So we're what we're able to do is get a sense, and these there's a strong relationship among the questions within each section. So when one moves, all the others tend to move too. So you're getting a better sense of direction than just if you asked each of those questions individually. And of course, we have the answers to those questions as we would in a normal survey too, what the proportion of Americans who agree or disagree with each of them and where they fall on the scale. But in that sense, but by averaging them, by having questions together that are related to a particular issue like the economy, we get a stronger sense of the direction and the mood of the country.
And so we get questions that build to each of the categories: economy, health, community, and society. And then we take an average of those and we get the overall national outlook index. And earlier on, Jay talked about there's something else we don't talk about too much, and that's foreign policy.
Well, I think also the index looks very much at, as we call it, America Now, and it is a national outlook. But another very important part of the president's responsibilities, and sometimes, what we as Americans don't necessarily think about, which is anything that is, beyond our shores, but is certainly very impactful in terms of how we are seen as Americans, and also how we are building relationships with countries around the world, and that's certainly foreign policy. And I think there were a couple of issues just in recent weeks. The Biden administration, I think, was tested on two areas. One being the ordered airstrikes against the Iranian-backed fighters in Syria, which he did authorize. And then I think something that was somewhat surprising to many people, and particularly Democrats, is when it was noted that the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia did directly authorize the killing of the journalist Khashoggi, that there was, silence from the Biden administration. Now, that's not to say that's not something that factors into their foreign policy regarding Saudi Arabia. But I think those were two things that practically occurred in tandem, and that seem to be playing in kind of different ways. What are your thoughts, and what do you think that this says about Biden as a president in the foreign policy realm?
Well, I think we don't know a whole lot right now. I mean, as we indicated earlier on, that this isn't something that gets a lot of play during the campaign. We've been very much tied to the economy and the coronavirus, understandably. So I was struck by Pew Research did some a study which was out a couple weeks ago, a week ago. And I thought there were some interesting numbers, which other polls have shown also, in that Biden's handling of foreign affairs generally is in the 60 to a little bit more range, which is even better than he's handling on anything else. Maybe that's because there's the absence of any terrible things going on right now that are driving the American people. But I thought it spoke to another important issue coming post-Trump and into Biden. 67% are confident that Biden will improve relations with our allies. 87% think it's important for other countries to respect the United States. 78% want to see the US assume a leadership role in the world. We've heard a lot during the Trump administration about kind of rolling up the carpets and into this, national isolationist perspective. And it doesn't seem the American people want that. I think they want us to be a place in the world, a world leader. That's a real difference. And I'll say one other point on this. 93% of Democrats say other countries will view the US more positively with Biden as president. 93% of Democrats. Also 41% of Republicans. Now that's still a huge partisan divide, but when you get 41% of Republicans saying something positive about Joe Biden, I think that's a real revelation to me anyway, when I was looking at these numbers.
I think it is worth putting foreign policy into context here in terms of how Americans think about stuff. We had a piece we did, I think it was a Facebook Trend of the Week piece. We do a Trend of the Week every Monday or Tuesday. And it was about America over time, over the last 30, 40 years. What have been the top 3 issues for Americans in election years? And when one of our team went back and looked at that, the last time that foreign policy was in the top 3 for Americans in an election year was in 2008, and it has never been in since. And it is very rare that it has been in. Back in the 60s, it was in every year, and 70s, it was in almost not every year, every election year. And I think that speaks a little bit to when we ask people about how do you think Joe Biden is doing or Donald Trump is doing on foreign policy, it just strikes me that it's not a top topic for people. It hasn't been for more than a decade. And I wonder how familiar people are when we ask them that. How much do they really know about what Joe Biden's foreign policy is right now? And if I'm asked, if I don't know anything about any, I'm not involved in any of this, and somebody calls and asks me that, my honest answer is, I guess I don't really know what he's doing on foreign policy. All I'm paying attention to is, the pandemic and the economy. Right?
But after that, if there is soon and after that, what's going to be interesting is that the foreign policy arena is sometimes an arena presidents like to participate in, because they can really, commander-in-chief is an easier role to deal with in a sense, or easier to push your policy than Congress. And when you try to put relief packages through and nominees and all those kinds of things that would get into the gridlock morass of DC, then presidents say, gee, maybe we can do something like re-enter the Paris Environment Accord.
Right.
Maybe we can get involved in, those are some things that, presidents like to do because it's easier to do.
Well, even Donald Trump, even the Make America Great, everything's about America, America first, Donald Trump, what he did in the Middle East was, his time spent there and what he did there was easier for him to accomplish things in a lot of ways than it was even when he had the Republican control of the Senate and the House. It was easier to deal with the Netanyahu and the Saudis than it was to deal with people in his own party in Congress.
So yeah. President Biden goes nowhere without dealing with coronavirus and an improvement in the economy, but he goes farther if he can restore trust in institutions and can put some positive things about America with treaties and leadership role in the world. I think that's where we need to watch him. And as this administration takes form, it's still obviously well within the 100-day period. So one of the things we talk about often is the Roper Center and how we go hunting periodically and find interesting information that Roper Center has dug up from times gone by. So there was one question that kind of caught our attention this week. It was a poll that Gallup asked Americans in December of 1970. So we're talking 51 years ago. And it was, how much does your family spend each week on average on food? Median answer, $34 a week. Now that's obviously a long time ago. Salaries are a lot less, but boy, anybody would jump for $34 a week right now in terms of $34, you'd be happy just to, get near the supermarket with right now.
That's when $20 was worth a couple of hundred.
I wonder what that's adjusted for inflation. $34 in 1970 adjusted for inflation. I mean, I wonder if it's the same, if we're close, to spending that same amount adjusted for inflation. Because one thing that is interesting about this, not just a fun fact, but it's kind of an interesting fact, is that food costs over kind of the history of modern Western economic thought, food prices have consistently and almost continually declined as a percentage of the family budget. And so it would be it's interesting to see that $34 seems so low, but I wonder if it's actually lower adjusted for inflation now than it was then. I don't know. Probably not Whole Foods. With Whole Foods around, my guess it's probably higher.
But also we have to think in terms of the discussion over even like the minimum wage right now and raising the minimum wage in Washington, and it goes up to 15. Well, what does that really mean in old dollar terms and the like? So I mean, these things are interesting to look at in the past, but also can be slightly illuminating for current debates in Washington as well, like the minimum wage.
So fun new feature. I look forward to hearing your fun fact next week.
And that's going to do it for this edition of Poll Hub. Poll Hub is a production of the Marist Poll at Marist College in beautiful Poughkeepsie, New York. I'm Mary Griffith and Poll Hub's executive producer. Thanks so much for joining us today. Rounding out our production team are Casey Schaff, our production supervisor, Amelia Morell, our production assistant, and Marcello Bettman, our trusted editor. Of course, thanks to the Roper Center Archive at Cornell University. They provide us with the ability to look back at survey questions and results over the decades. And if you have questions or comments, reach out to us on social media. We're at Marist Poll on Twitter and Marist Poll on Facebook and Instagram. Finally, if you like what you hear on Poll Hub, please consider leaving us a review on your podcasting app of choice. Positive reviews help others find us. And while you're at it, why not go ahead and subscribe? Again, thanks for being here. We'll catch you next week.